Hello. Hey, this morning I wanted to actually share something that had popped up on my radar while working with one of my patients. And I think it's something that will be beneficial to a lot of people who are listening. So, if you're a person who has done a lot of work with regards to uncovering trauma and trying to figure out why you have certain habits, behavior patterns, things that you feel like you are incapable of changing, or better yet, you have tried very hard to change and can't seem to really get at the root cause, then this is going to be very helpful for you. I had a patient who essentially had been struggling with an issue for a very long time. But this had surfaced in a way that was causing interpersonal communication problems, right? And when I look into this and as we dug deeper, we were able to find part of the reason, and that was there was a sense of injustice, and underlying that injustice was unfairness. So as I took them through a deep dive into the subconscious, we were able to find that this actual trigger occurred when they were much younger. So many of the traumas that we experience as adults actually happen in childhood, right? And the way to think about this is, when something happens, you have a reaction. How do you know that that reaction is the appropriate reaction for whatever happened? And to make this more concrete, what it means is that if someone calls your name, for example, do you choose to ignore it? Do you choose to get angry? Do you just brush it off, right? There are a whole bunch of different ways that you can respond. However, there's a dominant way that you have already decided to respond if that stimulus were to occur, right? So many of us develop these type of behaviors from childhood, because in childhood we develop the rules, the regulations, the protocols which we use to then operate our adult life. And the research is very compelling because by the age 7, we generally have generated over 10,000 different rules that we then shape our lives with. So bearing that in mind, it is important to try and figure out what those rules actually are. And for this particular patient, the rules were injustice, a sense of injustice. And in particular, it was when they felt that they had zero control over the situation and they could not affect it in any way, shape, or form. Questioning and probing were able to then identify that this underlying unfairness occurred when they were very young. And it was a situation whereby they were witnessing something that was unfair and they couldn't do anything about it. What was even more fascinating was that this unfairness was not against them, it was actually against someone else, someone close to them. And they learned two things. They learned that they had to shut up because if they spoke up, they got into trouble. And secondly, they were powerless to actually fix something. Okay? Now, they weren't directly involved in the event, but they were watching, and that actually caused this rift. And what actually happened in their brain was that they figured out, well, it is unfair. And so as an adult, they have been trying to right the wrongs of the world. And they've been constantly, if they see unfairness, they have to step in. They have to do something, right? They're compelled to, because now they've trained themselves to actually fix that so that they can feel better in and of themselves. However, the sense of being unfairly treated continues, and it's weighing on them because they ultimately have not handled their own unfairness, right? So while we were working together, we had very obvious things that we had to go through, and it became very clear that this particular trauma did not want to be solved, because when we got close to it, they would find every excuse in the book to try and pull away from it, right? They'd say, now is not the right time. They've been able to get to this point before. They've been able to identify the trauma, but they don't feel like they could actually do anything about it. So through a series of techniques and just gentle guiding, we're able to get to the stage whereby they could come face to face with their younger self that had been suffering this trauma. And the younger self was very hesitant. The younger self didn't quite trust that they were going to be able to do anything because they've been here before. And past experience has told them that, hey, every time we get here, their older self runs away. And this time they did exactly the same thing. They tried to run away. And I could tell that that was happening because as we got close to it, excuses started to pop up, right? Can't do that now. It's not the right time. Like, whatever it is that they were trying to help bury that uncomfortable feeling. So the good thing is that they really did want to change. They really did want to deal with it, and they were not going to let that excuse get in the way, and I had to help them to account. So by just very gently putting up the signpost that says, hey, you're trying to run away, would you like to continue? And then them actively making that choice to say, yep, I am ready, I don't feel ready, but I want to do this. And so they went ahead. We were able to use imagery to be able to go in and then affect their younger self, right? And to find a resolution. The younger self initially was very reluctant to accept anything. She tried verbally talking, that didn't work. She tried physical affection, that didn't work at the start. But through persistence, a little bit of coaching, we were able to get to the stage whereby the younger self was now confused as opposed to rejecting. And the younger self was, instead of being stiff, was able to just relax and at least absorb a little bit of the hug. And we figured out that that younger part has always lived here. And this was the place that was then liberated. And for the first time in the person's life, they were able to accept that, right, the injustice, the unfairness is not something that they have control over. It's how they interpret and how they feel compelled to do something about it. It's early days yet, and there are certainly other layers that we have to work on, but that is a very important piece. And I think the lesson here is when you get through and you have something that emotionally comes up and you are not sure how to deal with it, or you've continually dealt with it in a way that doesn't serve you, there is something there to look at, right? And there is also a difference between being able to identify where this behavior comes from and actually resolving it. So the work that I do with people is very simple, and that is because when we identify the younger person, what we need to do is basically fill the gap that was created during that period of time. And when you fill the gap, something miraculous happens. I'm going to give you an example. So when we have behaviors that get repeated over time, what happens is that it develops a pattern. And sometimes those patterns are very clear, sometimes they're a little bit hidden. But when you find the pattern, so for example, let's say you get angry all the time. And if you get angry, what a lot of therapy does is that they ask you to describe and tell you about when it happened, what the situation was. And from a cognitive point of view, a mental point of view, this is very helpful because then you can tease it apart. You may sometimes find realizations that you go, instead of doing this, I can do this. Instead of this option, I have all of these other options. Instead of this tool, I can use those tools. But that's very conscious. And that is very forebrain driven, meaning that you need to exercise willpower. You need to be completely in control at the time when you execute something like that. Whereas a lot of these things are unconscious, right? So if you have an anger issue and you remember the last time you were angry was a year ago or a week ago or a month ago, that does not help solve the root cause, because the root cause is when there is a particular stimulus or a trigger, you react a certain way. And how do you know to react that way? You know to react that way because you create a rule that says when these things happen, this is the output that I get. Right? Like, how do you know? If I called you a name, if I try to insult you, how do you know whether you should get angry, ignore me, walk away, call me a name back, punch me, right? Like, all of those are options, and depending on the situation, people are going to react differently, right? So you can go, right, it makes logical sense to do this, but it only makes logical sense because you agree with that rule. If you don't have that rule, if you're like, I am not a violent person, I would never ever hit somebody, punching someone is out of the question. If you are someone who has grown up in a particular household where swearing is not allowed, you may have picked that habit up and go, I'm never going to swear. I might raise my voice, but I'm never going to use a bad word, right? So all of these things come from your younger self. And when you travel back and you look at things, one of the things that I pay a lot of attention to is to make sure that we don't keep on re-traumatizing or reinforcing the actual behavior. To then go back, relive the situation, and then have them have the same outcome, and then go back and then relive the situation. What we do is we travel back in time, go all the way to the Genesis event, whereby you find what actually happened, how that affected them, and then after that, we extinguish the actual emotional hold that event has. And when you extinguish that, a bunch of miraculous things happen. You actually change the neural connections inside the brain. I have no way to actually prove this, but the descriptions of what people have told me sound very much like that. And it collapses their entire experience. And when they look back at every event that they've experienced this emotion, it completely changes, because now they're no longer approaching it from the younger self that had limited capacity and limited understanding and just made up a bunch of different weird rules, to then having a resolution and now not having to carry that burden throughout their life. Literally, their timeline collapses and then they get a new timeline. And that is something that I wish everybody has and has the ability to then experience. So conceptually, these things are very simple, and I want to let you know that if there is something that you've been struggling with, there is hope. There's not only hope, there is a way to go about fixing it where you do not need to experience and re-traumatize yourself. So I hope this has been helpful. I look forward to spending more time with you. Have a wonderful day.